Many thousands of years ago in Indian antiquity, the basis for all Indian culture originated in the Saptasindhu region. These peoples would go on to serve as the foundation of Indian tradition later and compose the Vedas. These were the Rigvedic peoples. The Rigvedic peoples most likely originated in the Saptasindhu, modern day Punjab, or maybe a bit further north. They spoke an early phase of Sanskrit, which some called Old Indic. It was in this language that the esteemed hymns of the Vedas were composed. The Rig Veda, in particular, is the oldest of the Vedas and one of the only surviving pieces of literature that we can use to figure out the way the peoples of the Vedic times lived. So, almost everything I say from this video will have some origin in the Rig Veda of some sort. Okay, so first, geography. Sapta Sindhu literally means land of the seven rivers, referring to the great Indus River, its five tributaries, and the now dried up Saraswati River. The Vedic people lived and sustained off these fertile rivers as it was good for domestication of animals and crop growing. Further north are the Hindu Kush mountains and other mountainous areas, and to the south and east, the Gangetic plains and forests of central India. These rivers were the main ones, but there are several other smaller ones that are also mentioned in varying areas of the Rig Veda. That is just the basic geography of where they lived, but I will come back to it later. Now, before looking at all the fancy political structure, battles, and tribes, we first have to understand how they lived on a daily basis and what they encountered around them. The Vedic people's communities were organized through simple towns and villages made of wood and mud bricks, so it was relatively simple and rural. The staple diet of the time is not what you would have expected. The Vedic people's main crop was barley. Apart from this, they ate a variety of cereals such as masura and consumed dairy foods such as yogurt and cheese. Rice, however, a staple in Indian diet today, is completely absent from the early Vedic age. Sheep and goats would have also been domesticated for meat. Cows are a different story. Nowadays, eating the flesh of a cow is considered taboo in Indian traditions, and this concept takes root in the Vedic era. Cows are depicted as noble animals, and therefore would have not been eaten on a regular basis. That being said, barren or old cows would still be sacrificed, suggesting that cow meat must have been only for ritual offering. So it is a very relatively simple diet that the Vedic people ate. Speaking of cows, they were of great importance to the Vedic people, not just because they were considered noble animals, but because wealth and money was denoted by the amount of cows you had. Indeed, early Vedic literature and thought heavily revolved around cows. There are several themes in the Rig Veda of entire battles starting because of cow stealing, also mentioned many times. In this way, cows were like money in the Vedic people's eyes, and a large amount of importance is given to them. Now, moving on to the people's status. A common misconception about the Rig Vedic age is that there was a harshly implemented caste system, with the Brahmins at the top and the oppressed Shudras on the bottom. However, this could not be farther from the truth. The caste system only fully started to take form in the Gupta period and maximized during colonial times. The early Vedic peoples did not have a rigid social structure. Of course, Brahmins and priests would have still been more respected than a slave or farmer, but a caste system was not firmly in shape yet. There were groups like the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas or warriors, but one was not considered superior to the other in any way, and it entirely depended on profession. When coming to political structure, there was an overarching king of each familial tribe, or jana. There were many assemblies that were held, the most important being the Vidhata assembly, in which they discussed relations of war, politics, and administration. The king also had a court and courtiers of some kind, the main ones being the Purohita and the Senani. The Senani was the general of the military, but the role of the Purohita is a bit more complex. Although they acted as priests and religious guides for the king, they also advised the king on administrative matters, oversaw battles with the king, and acted almost like a prime minister. As we are on the subject of priests, let's talk about their religious rites. The Vedic people worshipped gods like Agni, Indra, Varuna, Mitra, and the Vishvadevas. Most religious rites usually was performed with a yajna or fire sacrifice. One interesting thing about early Vedic religion was Soma. Soma was a ritual plant that was made into a drink and considered holy and sacred. What this plant was, we don't know. But Soma was very important to the early Vedic period. In fact, the entire ninth chapter of the Rigveda is dedicated to praising Soma. It was consumed by kings, priests would have had it, warriors would even drink it before battles. Soma is a very interesting topic and it probably deserves a video of its own. So, what about early Vedic military? How did that work? Horses played a significant role in the army. They are central to early Vedic and Indo Aryan custom and are highly exalted in the Rigveda. Infantry would have existed, with the average foot soldier having worn a turban called an ushnisha and armor made of usually deerskin. When it came to horses, cavalry troop also existed, but one of the main features of the army were the horse-drawn chariots. These chariots had spoked wheels and were a main component of Vedic military. Their weapons, by this point, would have been made out of copper and bronze, since iron had not yet been smelted there by that time. This horse-based army is also very common among other early Indo-European cultures as well. So next, number 3, the geopolitics and tribes of the Vedic era. There are over 50 tribes referenced in the Rigveda. Some of them are of Vedic or Aryan origin, and others are not. There were 5 main tribes known as the Panchajanas that were the most dominant. They were the Anu, Druhyu, Turvasha, Yadu, and Puru. Note that we don't know exactly on what areas of rivers each of these tribes resided in, as the Rigveda only gives vague descriptions of where each tribe was established at. But these tribes were the most frequently mentioned tribes in the Rigveda. These tribes and kingdoms often quarreled and fought over control of cows, rivers, and territories. In many cases, tribes would form temporary alliances and confederations against other tribes. For most of the early Vedic period, the Purus were the most important tribe. Some of their kings are noted in Rigveda's Mandala 6, 3, and 7. The main kings of the Puru were Trasadasyu and Purukutsa. Purukutsa in Mandala 6 is mentioned to have captured autumn forts and defeated the Dasa tribes, who I will touch on later. Trasadasyu, his son, expanded the Puru legacy. Trasadasyu literally means the one who made the Dasas quake in fear. These Puru kings ruled during the heyday of the Puru tribe, meaning they were the most important and dominant. There was a branch of the Puru tribe that would later become the most dominant of the early Vedic era. These were the Bharatas. As a subgroup of the Purus, they were described as allies earlier on, and a series of battles attested in the Rigveda involved them and other tribes. Chronologically, the first attested Bharata kings are Devavata and Devashravas. Their descendant was Srinjaya, one of the major Bharata kings that expanded their influence. His son was Divodasa, and his son was Sudas. The latter three would become involved in many wars against other tribes, and we can see chronologically how their power augmented. We also see that the Bharatas and Purus get involved in many conflicts with the others. During the time of Srinjaya, the Turvasha and Yadu tribes advanced till the Haryupiya and Yavyavati rivers, which were tributaries of the Saraswati river. The Purus and Bharatas, still a subgroup of the Purus by this point, successfully quelled the Turvashas and Yadus. I'll call this, for time's sake, the Battle of Haryupiya, which firmly established the Bharatas and Purus. Speaking of the Yadus and Turvashas, what about them? Who were these peoples? The Yadus and Turvashas are always mentioned together in the Rigveda, suggesting that they had a close alliance. The Rigveda also states that they came from faraway lands. Because of this, some have connected Turvasha to the Tuiria tribe attested in the Zoroastrian Avesta. The Tuiria were the Turanians of modern-day Uzbekistan. So the Turvashas and Yadus could have been descended from or related to the Turanians. In later literature, mentions of the Turvasha disappears completely, but the Yadus are still mentioned later. That being said, it is also very probable that the Yadus and Turvashas were Western Vedic peoples. Now back to the Bharata Purus and their series of battles. Although the two had a mutual alliance, this alliance though would fade, as seen in later battles. When Sudas was the Bharata hegemon, the Bharatas crossed the Vipas and Shatudri rivers towards the Kurukshetra plains. So by this point, it is fair to say that the Purus stood firmly against the Bharatas to stop their migration. There are many reasons as to why this could be. The Purus tried to divert the Parushni river to punish the Bharatas by building a dam on the river. As Sudasa's Bharatas continued on, they reached the banks of the Parushni river. But what they were met with was not the plain land of the opposite side of the river, but a great army waiting to clash with him. You see, the Purus and 9 other tribes all allied against Sudas to halt him, which formed a confederation of 10 kings. This battle was known as the Dasaragnya battle, or the Battle of the 10 Kings. This was a Bharata victory. Sudasa's men broke the dam that the Purus had built on the Parushni, essentially drowning the entire army of the 10 Kings Confederacy. The battle was significant because it established the Bharatas as the hegemons over the others, and it would continue to be like this for quite some time. He continued his progress to Kurukshetra, where he fought a battle and defeated a local chief named Bheda and other local tribes like the Ajas and Shigrus. Many centuries later, in that same region, the Kuru kingdom, one of the most influential Mahajanapada kingdoms, would be found. And so Sudas was one of the most powerful of the Bharatas and brought them to their peak. This series of Bharata battles, though, isn't over yet. Later, Sudasa's descendants Somaka and Sahadeva marched westwards into modern-day Afghanistan, in which they fought a battle with what seems to be the first Zoroastrians. Yes, you heard me right. The Rigveda mentions that Sahadeva, Somaka, and their main leader, Rajashva, fought a people beyond the Sarayu River in what is known as the Varshagira battle. The good thing, though, is that this battle is even described in the Zoroastrian Avesta. In it, it states that Vishtaspa, the first king to become Zoroastrian under the prophet Zarathustra, prayed to have fortitude to attack the Deva-worshipping Aretajaspa and his assistant Humayaka. This is almost definitely the Vedic leader of the battle, Rajashva and Somaka. This tale is retold in the much later Middle Persian epic named the Shahnameh. In the retelling of the tale, it mentions an enemy figure named Hushtiv. According to Avestan grammar rules, this was most likely a corruption of the Avestan Hazadeva, which unambiguously refers to Sahadeva. On the Vedic side, the Rigveda also mentions a king named Ishtasva as one of the enemies, which is suspiciously similar to Vishtasva, the first Zoroastrian king. The result of this battle was another victory for the Bharatas, firmly establishing them in the entire Saptasindhu over the Aryan and non-Aryan tribes. Speaking of the non-Aryan tribes, I said I would talk about the non-Aryan Dasa tribe and who they were. The Dasas are mentioned many times in the Rigveda as not worshipping Vedic gods, speaking a nasal-like language, and raiding cattle and villages of the Vedic people. They are also in many cases described as mythical-like creatures and having supernatural abilities that they used for evil. But clearly, they were another tribe that were either earlier natives of the Indian subcontinent or inhabitants of southern Central Asia, as has been suggested by many scholars. In any case, they were chief opponents of the Vedic tribes. Another group that is also mentioned as non-Aryan are the Parnis. The Parnis too are mentioned as having a crude speech and devoid of religion to the Vedic gods. They are in a sense depicted as a barbaric people. What is interesting about them though is that the term Parni in later Vedic literature meant trader or barterer. The Rigveda states that the Parnis were actually quite rich and were probably of the merchant class, but never offered sacrifices to the Vedic gods. This identity based off trade led many to believe that the Parnis were the people of the Indus Valley civilization. However, wars between the Parnis and Vedic peoples were very rare, suggesting that they must have known about each other's presence but still kept a distance. Like this, there are more than 50 peoples and tribes that are mentioned in the Rigveda, but that would be a video for another time. That is the end for now. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions on further videos, leave a comment down below and I will see you next time.